Hello and welcome to the Wheeler Centre and Melbourne's festival So You Want a Revolution series. I'm Karla Grant and I'm the executive producer and presenter of SBS TV's Living Black, the Indigenous Current Affairs program, and I'll be chairing the discussion. Before we start, if I can ask you to turn off your mobile phones and also let you know there will be an opportunity to put questions to the panel in the last 15 minutes or so. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and pay our respects to the elders both past and present. Tonight, not sorry enough, from the battles for basic civil rights that began in the 1930s to the overturning of Terra Nullius and the Stolen Generations apology, Australian Indigenous activists have achieved much over successive generations, yet it would seem many aspirations have been left behind along the way, and there is so much left to achieve. Tonight, the what, why, where, when and who of the future of the Aboriginal civil rights movement. I'd like to welcome our panel tonight. Some people have travelled, as I have today, from Sydney. First of all, I'd like to welcome the Honourable Linda Burney. She's the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales, the first Indigenous woman... She's the first Indigenous woman elected to the New South Wales Parliament, and Linda is a member of the Legislative Assembly and member for Canterbury and a member of the Wiradjuri Nation. I'd like to welcome Northern Land Council Chief Kim Hill. Kim was born and bred in Darwin and belongs to a number of language groups, including the Narrabeen, Tiwi and Jingli peoples of the Northern Territory. Before joining the Northern Land Council as CEO in 2008, Kim worked as a senior government advisor to the Northern Territory Chief Minister, the Deputy Chief Minister and the Business Minister. So welcome, Kim. And we'd like to welcome Tania Major. She's our youngest panellist. She's a Kookaburra woman from the remote community of Kowanyama in Cape York, Queensland. She has been the recipient of many Young Leader Awards. She runs her own consultancy and is currently working on an action research project which aims to re-engage young Cape York women into education, employment and training. And Tania is also the spokesperson for Generation One. Welcome, Tania. And lastly, but not least, Mr Robbie Thorpe. Robbie's a local from the Kratungalung people of the Gunai Nation, the traditional owners of Lake Tyers. He's an activist and also a co-presenter on 3CR's weekly radio program Fire First, a historically informed critical analysis of Aboriginal affairs and the ongoing political movement for land rights, treaty, sovereignty and the cessation of genocide. So welcome, Robbie. So first of all, I'd like to pose the first question to Kim. What would you say is the greatest Aboriginal rights achievement and why?
Very hard question. From a Northern Territory perspective, no doubt the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act. Unfortunately, back in those days, it was supposed to span across the nation. However, we were a territory at the time and still is a territory at this current moment. So I would think, from a Northern Territory perspective, is the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act.
And Linda, what would you say is the greatest achievement in Aboriginal rights?
I think you can't go past the 67 referendum. That had a national impact. And one of the aspects of that, which is a really interesting point about our discussion tonight, everyone, is that it was a coalition of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And if you think of the two iconic figures from the 67 referendum, it was Jessie Street, of course the mother of Justice Street, and Faith Bandler, who is still alive in her late 80s, early 90s, living in Sydney. And what that did was change the constitution of this country. And it took a long time. It was over 2 governments. And it also did something that's very difficult to do in Australia, and that's win a referendum. And I would say that that's probably the one that I'd highlight.
Mm-hmm. Tania, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
I would actually agree with Linda on this, because if you look at the onset of opportunities for Aboriginal people since the 1967 referendum and today, as a young person, there's just been this flow-on effect. I mean, it wasn't until, you know, the 80s, actually 70s, that University of Sydney opens its doors to Aboriginal people, and that's not that long ago. I mean, not that I was born in the 70s, but what I'm saying...
She's Scottish.
Of course I am, I can. But since then, I mean, there's still this continuous debate in that space with the referendum, but I think for me as a young Australian and an Aboriginal Australian, it showed that a country like ours could come together and unite when we put our heads together, not our bums together. Well, I shouldn't be saying that either, but in that context, you know, once we come together and discuss these issues, etc., there's an opportunity for amazing things to happen. And yeah, as a young person, I think the 67 referendum has opened so many doors and still continue to evolve.
Yeah. Robbie, what about you?
If I had to choose a legislation that was made for our people in the past 200 years, I'd have to agree with Kim, and that was the recognition of a freehold entitlement for our people. I've got a problem with all legislations made for Aboriginal people in this country, and I think this needs these more fundamental issues resolved before, you know, Europeans make laws for Aboriginal people. I still fail to understand where they get the jurisdiction to do this, in light of the removal of Terra Nullius. And you know, I still have a problem understanding where they get their jurisdiction to make laws for our people.
So we've gone from, you know, talking to the sort of greatest achievement, I guess, in Aboriginal affairs and Aboriginal rights. What would you think is the worst thing that has happened?
John Howard.
And why do you say that, Linda?
Well, to be, you know, really serious, everyone, when you think about where we were in the early 90s, we had unanimous a resolution in the Parliament, and I take on board Robbie's points, in terms of a proper formal process of reconciliation. Now, I'm not making comment on where that's ended up. I'm just saying that, you know, there was a very vibrant debate and dialogue and discussion going on in this country in the early 90s. And I think we sort of forget what happened with the Hanson years and where that took us as a nation. But John Howard was the architect of most of that. And where we moved backwards and the permission he gave this country to become racist again, the permission he gave this country to become completely xenophobic, and the way in which he manipulated, when you think about, and I'll just be very brief, you think about what he did to the reconciliation process, you think about what he did with the Tampa election and refugees and the demonising of refugees, and you think about also what he did in terms of just allowing racism to run riot and legitimising it, and moving us back when you look at what happened with the Mabo decision, and then what he did with the 10-point plan. I was here in Melbourne in '97. It was horrendous. And what he allowed to happen with Rob Borbidge and Fisher at that time, you know, bucket loads of extension, your Hills hoist is going to go, was just criminal and took us back to a place that I think, I was saying to Tania earlier, we're going to take, you know, decades to get over and get back to that vibrant discussion again.
Yes, I was going to say, do you think that he set Aboriginal affairs back?
I think he set Aboriginal affairs back enormously. And politically, when you think about the 2000 bridge walk in Sydney, I know there were similar events down here, and then the Tampa came over the horizon, and you think about the way those people were treated. What he did is he subtly moved the Australian consciousness from a possibility of proper reconciliation to demonising asylum seekers and he did it so skillfully that most people didn't even notice that it was happened. He allowed that debate to run about the white picket fence and the black arm view of history. He put people like Windshuttle and your favourite son, dear son down here, Andrew Bolt, onto boards like, the ABC, and it was criminal. And I think we're still feeling it.
Kim, what are your views on this? Do you believe John Howard was the worst thing that's happened? Or do you have other views?
I got other views. I mean, I lived under a regime in the Northern Territory in which the Liberal Party governed for most of my life, using a very similar tactics in wedge politics. Aboriginal people, they challenged every land claim. They challenged every right in which we had a right to challenge through legislation. That has been the Aboriginal Land Rights Act. So I wasn't surprised in regards to the politics of John Howard, because a lot of the architects of the Northern Territory came and worked for John Howard as his strategist and so forth. So the Northern Territory was well aware of what Howard and the team he built around him could do to a nation, let alone do to the Northern Territory for 27 years. So that wasn't no surprise in regards to Howard. I think from my perspective is more or less the failure of governments, and successive governments, either that be the Liberals or the Labor.
Do you think there's much difference between them?
They always say that Tories run the government, either if a Labor government's in or a Liberal government's in. But the reality for me is, the service delivery to Aboriginal people has been historical. Housing, education and health, and they still can't get it right. In the Northern Territory, the report which came out, the high number of suicides in the Northern Territory as a result of the intervention, and the list goes on. And one thing I get, not so much criticism, but why aren't you speaking up about it? The reality is when you live in that situation, there's not enough time to actually get through the grief period, because you go from one funeral to the next. And as a land council, I'm not the chief, the chairman's the chief, and I've got 83 directors who are traditional and senior ceremonial peoples, both men and women. But again, I think it's successive governments in regards to delivery services to Aboriginal people, and I think at the end of the day, it really is about seeking our informed consent as the original owners of this land. People talk to me about treaty. I don't think Australia's mature enough to deal with the issue of treaty. We're going through a constitutional referendum about recognition of the Australian Constitution. The Northern Territory is going through the issue of statehood. In 20 years we're going to be 50% of the population. Is that going to scare people? Yes, it is. But the reality is that I believe that we need to, no doubt, look at ways and improving our lives and take responsibility for our lives, but importantly, we don't get that back in return from governments, and particularly its policies of today, where really it's a band-aid approach.
Obviously you're from the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory intervention has been going for over 4 years now. Obviously started off by the Howard government, continued on with the Labor government. What are your views on that? Is that something that...
with the bio you read this just a while ago about myself being an advisor to the Chief Minister, it actually, the day I became the advisor of the Chief Minister was when Bruff and Howard made the announcement. I was actually the senior advisor, chief of staff for the business minister and so forth, and essential services. I became the advisor, and there's nothing much I could do and advise Claire Martin at the time when she was the chief minister, apart from exchanging the only correspondence which was being exchanged. There was no dialogue between the leaders. The only dialogue which happened around that period was press releases. And it's extraordinary working within government, particularly at that level, where Howard, Bruff would not answer phones, calls from the Northern Territory. What is going on? Why are you bringing in the army? Today, where things are up to, look, our people are very, very tired. They've seen a lot of money come into the Territory, but a lot of that money hasn't stayed in the Territory. You've got larger consortiums made of companies who've come into our communities, hired their own people, built a house and took all the money out. A lot of them not spending the money, so whilst they don't acknowledge the amount of money being spent in the Northern Territory, a lot of that's not hitting the ground or the pockets of Aboriginal people. which is quite sad because we do have community stores. We did have community stores until the government took over our community stores, and you as taxpayers are funding them, and they're private businesses. So again, it's strange. But look, I've had discussions with the Minister, particularly in regards to the 5-year occupation. We're still dealing with the issue regarding compensation because we believe that her valuation of our lands isn't as much as what we got an international firm to look at the value of our land, so the right amount of money is to be paid to traditional owners. So again, we're focusing on economic development opportunities in our regions because we see governments come and go. Sorry, Linda. But, we also see people come into our communities, but you know, they might have $100 in their pockets. They only spend $5 in our communities, which is quite sad because we want to build vibrant economies.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tania, what are your views? What do you think has been the worst achievement, I guess, that's happened within Aboriginal affairs?
I was thinking a bit about this when you first asked this question, and I thought, well, I can't really, to an extent, attack John Howard because I was in high school. I was battling my own system. I was battling a system where I come from a community where I was an A+ student. I'd been chucked in mainstream Australia and was failing. And so within that, I had to deal with the realities of this system and why am I treated different when my mother feeds me, I go to school every day, I'm at school every day. So, and also, because I'm a black fella, I shouldn't have an opinion on everything black in the country that I'm finding. And so I think from a Queensland perspective and also from a Cape York perspective, Jovi Oki Peterson. Yeah, in the context of things, so that's the worst.
Mm-hmm. Robbie, what are your views on...
I should mention Jeff Kennett in that vein.
Doesn't he run a football team these days?
He does, yes. President Hawthorne. I think the failure of successive governments to secure the rights of Aboriginal people was the greatest crime for me. From the very beginning, instructions from the Crown to Lieutenant Cook were to get consent to negotiate. You know, and we all know about the lie of Terra Nullius. You know, Terra Nullius to me is a premeditation to commit genocide. You know, knowing full well that this land's occupied. It's a continent. It's not just a little country. This place. It's a huge continent. And to describe it as a Terra Nullius, well, what are they thinking exactly? You know, they're going to make it that way, and that's, you know, the failure to recognise the magnitude of the crime that's been committed on the First Nations of this land, and to recognise the ancient sovereign law of this land, which was a sustainable one. It kept. We had a pristine environment because of that law. We had a very strict law. Our people have a very good structure of law, and it stood the test of time. And you know, for that to be failed to be recognised, I think is perilous in terms of the whole bigger picture. The failure to recognise that customary law, because you know, we're the custodians and the caretakers of this creation, this sacred place, and you know, that ongoing denial of our rights is, you know, from the failure for Australia to legislate for the crime of genocide in 1949, the beginning of the Liberal government, the fledgling Menzies government. And they were given a task to ratify and legislate against the crime of genocide in 1949. You can have a look at the Hansard if you want on that and see what they were saying about genocide at that time. And if they had legislated against the crime of genocide back then in 1949, maybe we wouldn't have had the deaths in custody issue. We may not have had the issue of stolen generations, the conditions of life issue that Aboriginal people live in this country, and the intent to destroy. I believe that's at the bottom of it all. This criminal attack was the intent to destroy the original people of this land and steal the resources. That's what it's all about. That's what colonialism is all about. That's what corporations are all about. Globalism is all about. And, the whole Western world is based on that process, and we're forced to assimilate into something I think is a dark, backward a dark age law, you know, and until there's that properly internationally scrutinised treaty process that occurs in this country, which ends this war, which they're in denial of. You know, for me, when a fleet of ships turns up into your territorial waters and claims your land, and what's an aggressive act? That's an act of war. You know, you could say that the war began then, but what day did that war end? You know, and why does this country celebrate the 26th of January, the day they invaded our land? You know, we've got to get real about it all. It's got to be that proper internationally scrutinised treaty process to create a proper foundation of law in this country. And until you have that treaty, that act of peace and healing, well, nothing's going to change. It's just the dominant forces imposing their laws, like native title. You know, when the High Court removed Terra, Nullius, the basis of their occupation in this country, where did they get the jurisdiction to determine what the entitlements of Aboriginal people were after that? You know, I thought native title was meant to be a time of justice for Aboriginal people. What it turned out to be was created security for non-Aboriginal people in terms of their occupation, and a mining boom to boot. And you know, we've got no rights. I spent 17 years in the process of native title and walked away from it at the end of the day.
Linda, what are your views on a treaty?
Look, I think that's probably one of the most difficult questions, in the sense that I'm not quite sure we know what we're really talking about when we say treaty. I think Robbie's view of a healing process is one way to think about it. But it's a really complex thing. I think that when I think of treaty, I think of a just settlement. I think of some sort of foundation, document, principle and action that brings about equity not only in the eyes of the law, but also equity in the eyes of Australian people. The process of getting to a treaty is something that we've never really resolved. And what it would look like, I think, is really the crux of it, particularly when you come to truly understand the way in which Aboriginal society is organised, the number of nations, the notion of sovereignty, independent nation states, whether it's Wiradjuri or Yorta Yorta or Barkindji or all your mobs. Because if you think about that, you know, hundreds of individual nation states, and then try and apply that to a model treaty, it becomes very complicated. But at the end of the day, when you look at other like countries, first world nations with a colonial history, those that have had treaty processes are way ahead of Australia in terms of social justice outcomes for First Nations. Whether it's Canada, and there goes my brand new earring, I brought in trendy Melbourne today. Whether it's Canada or New Zealand or America. So I don't have a definitive answer except to say that there has to be some resolution to the outstanding of issues, and if you want to call that treaty, then that's what it should be.
Mm-hmm. Kim, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, in my part of the world, again, the traditional owners in the Northern Territory, particularly within the NLC region, will see that they are still a sovereign nation amongst themselves. Today, people are still singing their songs, dancing. You know, you have the Dua people, you know, who watch the moon in regards to the cycle or ceremonies and songs. So I think there needs to be that recognition that there are nations within nations in this country, and there are some who are less fortunate because of colonisation, and there's some who continuously speak their language. And English is not a first or second language. So there are people in this country who still believes they have the sovereignty rights. to their lands. And people down here, I believe they also believe they have sovereignty rights. So again, I think we probably need to be a bit more mature in regards to identifying clans, particularly in regards to those who do practice. And the Land Rights Act is a stringent criteria in which you are identified as a traditional owner under Aboriginal law. It's inherited through your father, your Jungai through your mother, or a Dalian through your mother's country. But that is a society which does meet, I believe, international standards as a sovereign nation, so to speak. So there are, because we've had contacts with the Macassans, and we've traded as a result of the Blue Mud Bay High Court decision about intertidal zone, which now stands to is Aboriginal lands. So, and that covers 86% of the Northern Territory coastal area. And we're doing our own research because we want to get into business. And the reality is that there was a period back in the 17th century where the Macassans came over and collected X tonnage over a 20-year period. Which today dollars equates to about $800 million. And we want to get the tree paying back up, but it's more cultural before money, and that is to have that relationship again as a sovereign nation dealing with the Macassans or the various islands in Indonesia. So we still believe that we have our sovereign rights as First Peoples of those areas, and the Land Rights Act has allowed us to practice that and identify ourselves as traditional owners. Unfortunately, the Land Rights Act wasn't written for those people like my father who was taken away from their mothers. However, we have a role through my mother's country and also my father's mother's country from a cultural perspective. But again, I think that there is an opportunity for Aboriginal people in this nation to have a treaty. No doubt, if the Northern Territory becomes a state, and I understand that John Howard at one stage said to Nigel Scullion, he's a senator, if you want to become a state, we can do it through an act of parliament rather than going to a national referendum. So if
that's possible.
That is possible, and for the Aboriginal people and traditional owners of the Northern Territory, that is possible, where there can be an agreement, either it could be a treaty amongst which will then no doubt acknowledge our brothers and sisters in southern parts or the broader parts of Australia, where we'll no doubt talk and participate in ceremonies, and because our songlines come all the way down here, and it's remarkable. It's just a different dialects which is used.
I'd like to ask Tania, as a young person, do you think there's a lack of vision and understanding about the way forward and within Aboriginal affairs?
I wouldn't actually think there's a lack of vision. I mean, since ATSIC and being the youngest person in ATSIC and the cut of ATSIC, there hasn't been like this state or national direction from Indigenous people, led by Indigenous people. And that's what we're finding, and I'm finding on the ground. I mean, with what we're trying to do with Generation 1 and looking at real employment outcomes, we're finding that there's no actual framework on how to operate within Aboriginal affairs. And there's just there's only the majorities, the Knowles and the Marcies, but the Knowles and Marcies don't have the answers to everything Aboriginal in the country. But as far as vision is concerned, I mean, as a young person, there is this vision for us. There's this vision for us to own our rightful place in Australia as Australians, but also as proud Aboriginals. And what does that mean? Inherit your values as an Aboriginal person and understand your values and manoeuvre through this world, being armed with a first-class education, like being culturally grounded. And that's the model that my vision for myself as a young Aboriginal woman is the vision that I want to lead other young Aboriginal women and people who are trying to manoeuvre themselves in this landscape where there's actually no real voice for us in our own country. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's lack of vision, it's just the oldies need to come on board with us and see what our visions are and actually try and step into the space where we're at now in the context of things. I mean, yes, they were right at a time when we did march, that it was all in need and all in the context and all in the phases of the history of where we're going as a nation. But right now, all the young people I'm working with want a job, and they want a rightful place, and they want an education and be treated equally, you know, and they want the right to understand their rights as an Australian citizen, but also be respected as an Aboriginal Australian. So that's what I'm standing for, and that's the model that I will and will continue to put forward for other young Aboriginal people in this country. And that's my vision, and if they choose not to go on that vision, that's entirely their choice. But the time is right. Now the change is happening, post-apology, social media, social network, you know, we have the opportunities and the mechanisms of change. And, you know, I hear talk about treaty, which is important. I hear talk about referendum, which is also important. But it's the doing. It's actually getting on the ground and providing the right information and building people, building their capabilities and building their self-esteem to how do they fit in as an Aboriginal person in Australia today, and take that road comfortably and the opportunities that they're facing with what we're trying to do. And my motives and why I joined Gen 1 is about opportunity, it's about real job outcomes, it's about making this landscape easy for us to manoeuvre in instead of all the issues that my grandmother confronted, you know, the barriers my mother, my grandmother, my sister, my brother, who are still continuing to face these barriers in my communities that I'm dealing with. But
how do we motivate young people to, you know, take up those opportunities?
Well, what we're doing right now is actually looking at the success stories. We're actually going out and we're interviewing other Aboriginal people who are manoeuvring, not just me, because there are so many other Aboriginal kids and young people who've stepped out, who've broken down the barriers. We're giving them voice. We're giving them, you know, we're showing them that there's a pathway. We've got a huge campaign coming up in the next couple of weeks. You'll see on television, real life, real stories. Change is real, you know, for what we're trying to forecast. We're trying to let Aboriginal people know that, you know what, you're valued and your story and your contribution to this economy is valued. And that's where the only change is going to actually happen, and motivation is going to take place when they're seeing other Aboriginal people in this space. And by seeing role models and leadership, then I think it gives them the authority, it gives them the opportunity and the choice to either step up or step down and play low. That's what I think.
Sorry, can I just... I acknowledge what you're doing, Tania. It's fantastic. The thing the Northern Land Council, particularly its cultural leaders, are grappling with, and there's a discussion we have all the time, is somebody who's 18 years of age who can more or less is eligible to vote at a federal election, territorial election or so forth. The question for us, does that person have a cultural authority to speak as a traditional owner or as a leader of that clan? That's the debate we're having amongst ourselves. Yes, we see the need for young people to come through the system, but should it be at the loss of our culture, our language, our practices? We did an exercise with the Northern Land Council members in which all of them, 70% of them recall their fathers or mothers meeting white man for the first time. And the other 30% was their grandparents. Some of us are privileged in regards. I didn't do a lot of primary school because we lived on the Tiwi Islands. Did a high school, not a lot of it. Okay, I did year 12, but I was fortunate because I had a good maths teacher, sports teacher, who got me to play rugby, and then Aussie rules and everything else. But for us today, the challenge for Aboriginal people, particularly in the Northern Land Council region, the Northern Territory, is the competing interest between those who want to get out there and get a job to those who have a cultural responsibility for the maintenance and continuation of their culture, considering the amount of people who are dying, and particularly the older people who are dying. We don't have many traditional old languages being spoken in our region, for example. If you go across the various clans, nations, there's not many old people left. One of the older Tiwi Islanders, and you've got to put this into context, where the Tiwis, there's only 2,500 of them in the world who speaks that language. You know, if you go to the Gumatj in the East Arnhem region, there's only 3 clans of the Gumatj nation, and they only speak that language. Yes, they all speak Yunga Matha, but it's different dialects. So for us, it's grappling. We don't have the answer, but it's, okay, you're 18, go out, get a job, get an education, but then I'm a community leader or I'm a senior traditional owner. Well, hang on, you went through a Bullender, system, but you haven't been through the Yolngu system. So
can they not do both?
Well, my chairman makes a comment to our younger members, either, when they talk strong about culture, the older people make the commentary that either he doesn't know what he's talking about or it's all in his imagination. And I sit there as a CEO and I go, we've got to encourage our young people. But he doesn't have any cultural authority to speak on that issue, particularly when it's related to land. In regards to service delivery, education and so forth, employment, yeah, go for it. But in regards to the people, it's different. So we're grappling with that issue. I mean, when I go through and drive through Central Arnhem, and you see 200 kids on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, you go, first sense, why aren't you at school? Then you go into Manangrita and then they tell you, oh, we've got a big ceremony out there, and you go, gee, these people are dancing on the same ground. Their ancestors danced 60,000 years ago. Should I really go out there and tell them to go to school? No.
I reckon, and I'd be interested in what Robbie's views has been on this, because you've been part of the movement from that street struggle day, and is that, and everyone's basically said it in a different way, what's really missing in Aboriginal affairs, in my opinion, now, and what you're hearing is people from different parts of the world, and what we're showing to you is the incredible diversity of Aboriginal Australia, which is one of our greatest strengths. But what's really missing, in my view, Karla, is that there is no national agenda anymore. There used to be. Whether it was in the 70s, just getting extreme basic human rights and setting up the first Aboriginal-run organisations on the East Coast, or whether it was, Wave Hill and all of that stuff kind of came together at the same time, where there was a real movement. And whether, for whatever you think of ATSIC or FCATSI and all of those national organisations that don't exist anymore, it did create a sense of a national movement, no matter where you were from. And what we've got now is a number of national organisations, and there isn't a voice. You've got the
Congress, National Congress,
which I think will develop into our political voice. You've got the National Council for Reconciliation, which is, and I was a member of the second council before it became the body it is now, that really led the political debate. But the National Council for or whatever it's called now, Reconciliation Australia, doesn't. And you've got a couple of other organisations that escape me at the moment, but there's no central. And I think that's what you're saying.
Do you think there needs to be more of
so we're just flailing around a little bit?
More of a coordinated approach, are you
Absolutely.
saying?
I mean, I think...
I agree.
And, Robbie, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but, I think one of the most powerful... And I know that, Kim, I think you had a crack at this. One of the most powerful things that we could have is a proper federation of land councils across the country. Because you are the organisations that most represent the most local people, whether it's the New South Wales legislation or whatever. And it just seems to me that, we're working in separate pockets at the moment. It'll come back together, but we used to have it together and it's kind of all blown away. And I don't know what the answer is, getting back together, but that's what we need, in my opinion.
Robbie,
and you would have a national movement.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. What do you think about that?
When I grew up around Fitzroy and Melbourne, we built these organisations ourselves.
Absolutely.
Community controlled, preventative health programs, free legal service, under 5 clinics, all the critical areas of survival, childcare, all those things, and done that despite the government's duty of care and fiduciary obligation and control, the control that they had of our welfare. Despite all that, we had to create these things ourselves. And from those initiatives from the community, these things were working and started to make impact. And some, the health service had 80 of these community-based, community-controlled health clinics on the ground around Australia start to make an impact of the horrendous situation of Aboriginal health in this country. And that act of self-determination was ultimately crushed by the government, because I believe that our welfare, our health, our royalties is something that the white man manages in this country. And like I said before, this country's always had the intent, the governments in this country have always had the intent to destroy our people. And that's reflected in the stolen generations and what they've done to how they control our welfare in this country. They've created the conditions of life. They're totally responsible for everything here. And I see nothing less than a fundamental change in this country for us to, improve our position.
What do Aboriginal people need to do to take control of their lives?
We've got to continue to press upon the wider community about the true history of this country and the legal facts of the matter in this country. You don't get sovereignty by committing acts of genocide and lying about your occupation. And this is not a proper jurisdictional foundation here and a proper law to grow anything on. And until that fundamental legal situation is addressed, and it needs to be addressed at the international community. There's no place in this country that Aboriginal people can go to get justice. So that needs to happen. We need to continue and press upon the wider community here that these changes need to be made. Otherwise it'll continue to be an imposition, which I see that ATSIC was, an imposed representative body for the Indigenous people. What sort of people in the world cop that sort of stuff? It was imposed despite us having models of what a representative body would look like. I know NAO had one. I know the National Aboriginal Island Health Legal Service had models, all community controlled, where there was participation and involvement of the people doing it for themselves. But no, that was self-determination, and the Aboriginal people weren't going to have that. And the government's determined that we don't have self-determination in this country. And they're determined that our human rights aren't recognised because it basically bankrupt the country. Morally, legal and spiritually. They haven't got a proper legal foundation. Until that's sorted out, as far as I'm concerned, nothing's going to change. And I believe that because what's happened to our people in this country, we're the holders of the customary law here, we're the custodians of this place. Because we've been removed, you've got a thing called ecocide happening now. And there's a parallel between genocide and ecocide. I really believe this, and it's not just here in Australia. It's a global position as well.
One of the reasons I've been called sellout on a number of occasions for it, but that's okay. One of the reasons I decided to, and I worked both at a senior level in government as well as a senior level in the NGO sector, that I decided to move into mainstream politics. As you can make a decision. You can either try and change things from the outside, which is important, or you can get in the middle of it and try and change things from the inside. And I think that's what we all of us in this panel have done in different parts of our lives. But at the end of the day, it's in those legislative assemblies where the laws of this land are made. And one of the really interesting things for me, Karla, has been moving to a place outside of Aboriginal affairs where I've got the responsibility of representing 40, 50, 60,000 people, and only 500 of them are blackfellas. And that's been a really interesting transition. But it's about influencing things from within to make sure that whatever the laws that are made, whether they're specifically Aboriginal or not, have or take countenance of everybody. And it's been a wild old ride, I'll tell you sometimes, but it's been worth it, I think.
Do you think that getting more Indigenous people in Parliament is something that's been talked about quite a bit.
Yeah,
creating change.
Yeah,
getting
look,
in there in the system.
I think that's a really important point. But we need, and one of the reasons I admire this fabulous woman beside me is that she is in that generation where it's been made possible by some of us oldies. Thank you very much. For you to be able to do the amazing things that you've done in terms of education, and it's remarkable when you see young, confident Aboriginal people and you think, crikey, when I was that age I don't think I'd be able to do the sorts of things that they're doing. But the importance of Aboriginal representation in the parliaments of this land, I think, is a critical one. But you can't get, if you think you're going to get into Parliament because you're a black fella, well, you may as well give up. You get into parliaments because you have the capacity to represent and stand in the shoes of everyone. And your Aboriginality is a real added bonus because you make people think in those caucuses before they say the dumb things that they sometimes say. But yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's really important, Karla, and I think it's a shame. And the party that I am part of should be equally ashamed that there has been so few Aboriginal people pre-selected in winnable seats. And, it worries me that you think, you got your one black fella up, so that's our quota. But, I think political parties need to really focus on making sure that there are good Aboriginal people running in seats where they're going to win.
We're almost sort of towards the end of the discussion, but I just wanted to look at the way forward, I guess, get your views on that. Where should we be headed now, sort of looking forward over the next 10 years, I guess? We've got constitutional change that's sort of in the pipeline at the moment. What are your views on that, Tania?
Well, I think we're all playing our part because this landscape is extremely complex and dynamic on its own. And I personally think my vision for my role and my influence and my time here is building people on the ground in the communities and giving them, because that's where I come from. I can only give you my life perspective and experience from my experiences growing up in remote Cape York, but leading in my community with my people in my region, but also having a national influence around what I'm doing with Generation 1 and how we're trying to really look at employment, but at the same time build Aboriginal people's confidence in wider Australia, because post-apology and all these 60,000 job pledges, you can't expect a blackfella to change their mind and step into a job like that after what had happened to us, over our lifetime and our span of Australia being colonised. So I think I will remain optimistic. I'm an extremely optimistic person because that's how you've got to really survive in this landscape. You've got to tap into the energies who do want to do good. And we can only fight our own battles. And my battle is to support young people, young Aboriginal people who do want to step up and own their rightful place in the wider Australian landscape, wherever they may choose to be, by sharing my knowledge, my cultural understanding of who I am and where I'm going. Because the opportunities now, change is real, change is now. And that's what I keep saying to young people I come across: stay there at uni for another year, because there's a big clear distinction between a pay packet when you finish uni to what you're doing right now. Try $40,000 more and more shoes, and that works with the girls. But yeah, and for me, I'm ready for the ride, and I've been on this ride for a while, and I'm still going to continue chipping away what I can do, because I can only influence my sphere of influence, which is the communities that follow me, the communities that may not agree with me. And like you, I have been called sellout quite a few times, but you can only do so much, and I'm just one person.
Well, I think the community needs good role models such as yourself and Linda and Kim and Robbie. We all need that, so you're doing great. Robbie, what about you? What do you think is the way forward?
Yeah, I agree that our kids have got to be encouraged. There's an old saying from Bob Marley. He said, "If you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you're going to." I think there's a lot in that statement for our kids. It's important to know your history, who you are. When I was growing up, I was ridiculed. I was always the last served in shop, and I didn't really understand the racism at that time. But I didn't want my kids to go through all that stuff, and so I taught myself about what was going on, and it's pretty full on, the history of Australia. But I'm very proud of my people, their resistance, whether physically in the first instance. There's battlefields all across my country where there's dead men, women and children who died defending this country. There's no monuments. It's a pretty horrendous history here. But I'm so proud of my people who have continued to resist against this colonialism and this intent to destroy our people. Our people are quite capable of looking after themselves. We've been doing it since the beginning of time. We're quite healthy and happy people here. And I'd like to get back to a day when we had the quality of life and the standard of living that we once enjoyed. I'm more concerned about the job of justice rather than the jobs with justice. You can get the jobs with justice at McDonald's. But, let's talk about the job of justice being done properly and establish a proper legal foundation so this country can grow properly from. The American Constitution, that recognised everyone as equal. They also have a treaty with the First Nations which gave them the independence when they booted the Crown out. That's what's got to go out of here. There's a number of...
right now.
There's layers of bureaucracy that Australia is suffering from and paying taxes to. You've got your Crown, your Commonwealth and your state. And there's too many layers of bureaucracy. I suppose that sort of is manifested from the convict penal colony mentality and the way that this country's has manifested from. And it's built on a lie, we should remember. Terra is a legal fiction. And that's why this country's got no jurisdiction over our people, who are probably recognised as the oldest known socially organised society on the face of the earth. We're quite capable of looking after ourselves. We just need the opportunities in our own country.
Well, we might take some questions from the audience now and open up the discussion. We've got some microphones around the place, I think, roving mics. So, just over here, the lady with the stripy top here. Can we go to her? Can we get a mic there?
Hi. Is it on?
Yep, yes. We can hear you.
Thank you to everyone for coming and sharing everything you've shared with us tonight. I think everyone's really enjoyed themselves so far. My name's Laura and I'm a 21-year-old girl studying, and born in 1990, I was, very much grew up in the Howard era, and I don't really have any memory of, Aboriginal affairs prior to that. And I was brought up in a situation where we were only taught a certain thing at school. In the Howard era, you weren't taught about, Aboriginal people and culture beyond the fact that, they existed, prior to
I hate to tell you this, but that happened in my era too.
Yeah, and in mine.
And I guess my experience now, because I've become incredibly interested in this over the last couple of years, is that there's a huge deficiency in the knowledge of, people who are under 25 about Aboriginal people, culture and the history of the country, because, the education system, might have been the same in your day, but, you possibly had the active political debate that doesn't exist at the moment. So what I'm finding is that there's this whole generation growing up who doesn't have, who isn't educated and who doesn't have the political will or the desire or the appreciation of the, complexity and beauty of Aboriginal culture. And I don't know, it's really...
The question.
The question what do we do? How do, as a white person, how do you start to, you know, change other people's minds?
Linda, you might be able to give us some thoughts on that. You've got a background in education.
Yes, just really briefly. Look, you probably know a hell of a lot more than people prior to your generation. I think the changes in the school curriculum, certainly in New South Wales, and I'm sure down here, have been not down here. Okay, the changes in curriculum in New South Wales have guaranteed that no child can come out of school not knowing the truth. But clearly that's not the case everywhere. And I think, you know, we all get this question very often. What you need to do is what you're exactly doing now, coming to things like this, making sure that you're aware, making sure that when your friends say a dumbass thing that you say something sensible back to them, making sure that when you have a family, if that's what you do, into the future, that you raise your children to be fair and just and understand that there's a truth to this nation. And don't beat yourself up about it. Just do those things and it's the little things, the humble things that change the whole. We've been talking about big stuff like legislation and governments and parliaments. It's what you guys do on a daily basis that brings about the change, and you being here tonight is part of that change.
Thank you. Okay, just the lady at the back.
I think I need a mic.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
I believe that the battle for the Indigenous people lies very much in economics. I believe that Australia is such a rich mineral country, and the problems that the Indigenous people have lies very much in the wealth that is being taken from them, and I don't believe that the chances of legislation and the formation of treaty will ever come about unless we can handle the mining industry.
Kim, I think you would have some thoughts on that. We talked about achieving economic independence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. No doubt there's been a discussion about Aboriginal people, and particularly the issue regarding who owns the minerals. In the Northern Territory, we're talking with the Territory Government and the Australian Government, particularly the issue of water, because we believe we own the water. And particularly on Aboriginal lands, where the water sits under Aboriginal land, and when it's pumped to the surface, you need a Section 19, a lease arrangement with the Land Trust. We're saying that we own all of it, particularly the consumption, the commercial aspect. So we are making inroads slowly. I would say from the north, in Northern Australia, watch this space, because we will be, as a result of the Blue Mud Bay and owning 86% of the intertidal area in the Northern Territory, we will watch this space, because I'm looking at possible, because you've got the fishing industry. What is the fishing industry really worth in Northern Australia, in that intertidal area? So all I can say is watch this space, because I believe that we'll get some investors, and maybe some people may not like where these investors come from, but we will strive for independence from an economic perspective. So that one day, and I believe in the next 10 years, we'll have that independence where we'll build our own schools.
Okay, we've got a question here. Just yeah.
I don't think I need the mic either.
Okay.
My name's Peter Nathan. I'm from the Gulf Cup in Terra. I've had the pleasure of meeting my sister girl up there, Tania, in North Queensland, and also the pleasure of meeting Ms. Burney a couple of weeks back in Brisbane. We saw Camera. That lady's comment and a question also, and especially around the fishery stuff, because I come from the Gulf of Carpentaria, and we got sea rights in the late 80s, early 90s, and we've just got a consent determination over the Wallasey Island groups and Bountiful Islands. And the fisheries are still allowed to come up to the high tide mark in Queensland. And I mean, and the landmark decision in the Territory around 8% plus of the waters, I mean, it's also going to just push that industry back into the Gulf a bit further. I remember when when the Vunma, which is a big boat, got stuck in the reef through cyclones in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and they were looking at reparations for the mines and also for the fisheries, but not for the traditional owners of those waters. So when you've got uneven legislation across the nation, you can't have an equal say to resources. And at what cost do we control mining? Because my great-grandmother sat on the land where the tree where she was born was ripped out of the ground to pull apart an open-cut mine for the Wanyi people, which was a landmark decision of $60 million, which they pull out every single week. So at what cost do we control these mining industries? Because, you know, to live and work down in Melbourne, to compromise my upbringing back home, in order to do something for young people, I mean, I'd more than happy be sitting on a rock fishing right now.
Wouldn't we all want to be there?
Is at what cost do we step into this economy, and how much do we compromise of land, culture, and heritage, and just access the country? Because, I mean, since coming down to Victoria, where I see this as the pinnacle of Aboriginal rights in Australia, and seeing people in Victoria, you know, disheartened about the way that they're treated, and this is the place where we held in high esteem. I mean, you know, it hasn't. I don't think a lot has changed, but I guess the question is, at what cost do we move forward?
Who would like to answer that, Robbie?
So your rights are restricted by the native title agreements. Have you got native title agreements? That's spelling out, you know, what the rights of each party is there in terms of the mining, and it's totally unfair, the whole process, I believe. You know, this country started off mining our country, and that's what it was all about. It was about our resources. You know, Aboriginal people have been standing in the way of multinational mining companies for 200 years in this country. You know, it was the gold rush which created a lot of wealth, and that came out of here in Victoria in 1855. A lot of wealth was created in Victoria, and you know, a lot of the people who have got shares in these mining companies are living here. So, you know, and what you say about, you know, we've done it really hard to people in Victoria. You know, we haven't got any native title, and you won't see any native title here. We get agreements with the state government, made by the state government, and you know, it's just been a long drawn-out process. And it's right through it, they've denied our rights. So, you know, you just got to do your best with what you got there in terms of your mining rights. And it's interesting to hear Kim talking about, you know, how far you can go down, how deep you got in terms of control over this land. And what they're saying, you only own a thin slither across the top. You know, your quarter acres out there, that's all you own. And they can move you when they feel like it.
Can I just quickly say that I don't think you should feel that you're losing out. I mean, I don't see it the way that you've described it. It's what's in your heart, you know. We haven't mentioned it tonight, and I know we've got to finish, Karla, but it's about identity. And your identity is exactly the same here, brother, as it is up in your country. Yeah. And, you know, you're not compromising anything by being here for a few years.
No, but I actually agree with you, because I know you. But I do, in the context that I had to leave my community at 14 years old to get an education. And in that context, while I was there out at 14 years old, it comes back to your point about traditional structures. I don't know the song lines or my dancing, but my cousins do, and my cousins who are younger than me are treated a lot more with respect from the elder women, even though I'm older than them. So there is, I can see both your point, and I struggle every day. Last week I was at home with my family dragging for long-necked turtle in the rivers, as well as crayfish, as well as looking for flying fox. I'm sitting there. The other day I'm in Sydney in a boardroom meeting at the Opera House, talking about your point exactly around, you know, our rights in the context until we get treated equally by the law in this country. You know, we were looking, that's the fundamental to everything, because right now we're not. you know, and then, yeah, you know, I'm stuck between Cape York, New York and Melbourne.
Okay, one more question? No, that's it. Sorry, we have to, I've been told to, we've got to wind it down now, and I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, and please join me in thanking our panellists, Linda Burney, Kim Hill, Tania Major and Robbie Thorpe.